Hello, and welcome to the Introduction to Disaster Volunteerism First Aid Training. We are World Cure Center, a registered 501c3 organization founded amidst the 9/11 relief effort to help communities and the residents prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters, to train, support, and coordinate residents to be ready to respond immediately, thereby reducing the pain and suffering caused by disasters, and to provide a network for local and underserved volunteers to coordinate amongst themselves and connect with disaster resources. We are subject matter experts in spontaneous volunteer management, disaster volunteerism safety, and skills-based training. We apply our lessons learned from the field to the classroom. World Care Center has deployed all over the world to respond to many types of disasters and provide training classes to people from all walks of life. In our experience, these are 5 important characteristics of the modern disaster response ecosystem. 1. Citizen volunteer involvement will happen and should happen. 2. An effective disaster response requires pre-planning that includes the function of spontaneous community volunteers. 3. Officials and community volunteers must cultivate partnerships before emergencies. 4. Self-care is crucial to ensure a resilient responder community. And 5. Social media will significantly affect disaster response capabilities. We would like to thank the organizations listed on this slide for their support of this training and the work of World Care Center. My name is Yosef Travis. I'm an emergency medical technician in New York State. I'm an EMS educator with extensive knowledge of curriculum development and educational theory, and I'm a CPR and first aid trainer specializing in workplace response. You can see a picture of me at the bottom of the slide. When we develop a new training at World Care Center, these are the learning objectives we have in mind. We want to educate citizens to identify and eliminate hazards in their daily lives. We want to educate and empower citizens to prepare for and respond to disasters in their community and beyond. We want to empower citizens to emerge as disaster volunteers. We want to ensure the safety and skill level of all disaster volunteers. And we want to support team leadership through coordinated and collaborative disaster volunteer placement and management planning. The learning objectives for this particular training are to understand how to avoid injury, illness, or exposure to bloodborne diseases while providing care, to understand some of the common illnesses and injuries that may occur during a disaster or the subsequent cleanup, and to understand the methods of caring for these illnesses and injuries. Please note, this course is not intended to replace a certification training course. It is an awareness course. Today we will discuss the following topics: understanding hazards, preventing illness and injury to yourself, your role as a disaster volunteer, how to identify an emergency, how to provide care for bleeding, how to provide care for heat or cold emergencies, how to provide care with proper positioning, and then we will discuss next steps before we wrap up. Let's get started. Please pause the video for a moment and think about a disaster you have heard about or experienced. What were some of the hazards faced by people affected by that disaster? Were you thinking about fire? Raging fires have caused devastating destruction throughout history, from the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD to the recent heartbreaking tragedy in Grenfell Towers, London. Also, fires may result from a disaster, as in the case of the Hurricane Sandy-induced fire that burned 121 homes in Queens, New York. Survivors of fires may be severely burnt, and they may have breathing difficulties from inhaling smoke or carbon monoxide. What about chemical exposure? Many chemicals are hazardous and must be stored and transported appropriately to prevent them from being released. However, accidents do happen and chemicals can be introduced into the environment. Each chemical will cause different symptoms, but common symptoms include difficulty breathing, unexplained bleeding, excessive sweating or tearing, and loss of consciousness. This picture shows a train derailment in New Jersey in 2012, which resulted in the release of vinyl chloride. Vinyl chloride can cause nausea, vision problems, and eventual death from breathing issues. Whether due to faulty construction or natural phenomena, structures may become unstable and collapse with little warning. Often, these disasters require significant resources to shift rubble and search for survivors and bodies. The World Trade Center attack in 2001 resulted in weeks of recovery efforts as rescuers dug through the rubble to find survivors. Though necessary for human life, water can also be a hazard in disasters. Water-based disasters often involve flooding caused by heavy rains, burst dams or dikes, or damaged pipes. These disasters may result in heavy loss of life due to drowning and injury from floating debris. Survivors may be unconscious and may have inhaled significant amounts of water. Last, but certainly not least, a heat wave or cold wave can wreak havoc on municipal functions such as sanitation or transportation. Additionally, those who are unprotected from the weather, for example, people who are homeless, or those who have difficulty maintaining their body temperature, for example, the young and the elderly, can be quickly overwhelmed. We have discussed some of the common hazards in disasters. Did you think of any that we didn't cover? We must realize that hazards are also present in the efforts to clean up and recover from disasters. In regard to the disaster you focused on previously, what were the hazards for those involved in response and cleanup? Examples of hazards in disaster cleanup include injuries from building collapse, heat exposure, cold exposure, chemical inhalation, smoke inhalation, becoming emotionally exhausted, and last but not least, biohazards, especially from body fluids. Now, biohazards is of particular concern in a discussion regarding first aid. People who are bleeding or releasing other body fluids present a danger to rescuers because diseases such as hepatitis can be transmitted by contact with infected body fluids. Biohazards include any microorganisms that can cause disease. In disaster response, biohazards may come from various body fluids of victims, especially blood. Some examples of diseases transmitted through body fluids are hepatitis A and B, human immunodeficiency virus, and Ebola. Remember, you have no idea what diseases a person carries or has been exposed to during a disaster. Therefore, you should treat every body fluid as if it is contagious and use preventive measures to protect yourself from exposure. In the next topic, we will talk about ways that you as disaster volunteers can protect yourselves and reduce your risk of injury or illness from the hazards we discussed. Benjamin Franklin said, "An ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure." While injuries and illnesses are not always preventable, there are steps we can take, especially as disaster volunteers, to mitigate the risks. We will focus on three aspects of preventing illness and injury to yourself in disaster response: using protective equipment, maintaining your physical well-being, and ensuring your emotional well-being. Personal protective equipment, or PPE, can prevent illness, injury, and exposure to communicable diseases during disaster response and cleanup. You should be familiar with how to use PPE before you are actually in a situation where you need to use it. In treating disaster victims, especially those with significant bleeding, disposable gloves are necessary to prevent exposure to communicable diseases spread by the victim's body fluids. You should wear a fresh set of gloves for each person you help. There's no special way to put on the gloves when you're using them for first aid. However, we do need to discuss a special way for removing contaminated gloves without exposing yourself to whatever is on the gloves. Exercise 1. Safely removing contaminated gloves. I will read through each step as we go through the next few slides, and on the last slide there will be a video demonstration. Now, the gloves that you wear should be snug but not tight. You should be able to insert 2 fingers between the glove and the skin of your wrist. Step 1. Pinch the glove material just above your wrist with the other gloved hand. Step 2. Pull the pinched glove completely off your hand without snapping the material. Do it slowly. Step 3. Grasp the removed glove in your gloved hand. Step 4. Slide 2 or more fingers of your ungloved hand between the remaining glove and your skin. Be careful not to touch the contaminated glove with your bare skin. Step 5. Use the inserted fingers to turn the glove inside out and remove it completely with the other glove inside it. Step 6. Dispose of both gloves in the proper receptacle. This may be a red bin or other container for hazardous waste. Step 7. Wash your hands really well with soap and water. Maintaining your physical well-being is vital to avoid illness and injury during your work in a disaster cleanup effort. Unfortunately, many disaster responders, even those with years of training, become so fixated on their work that they forget to take care of themselves. We must remember that any responder who becomes ill or injured will require care, and that will take resources from the recovery efforts. So do stay fit, do sleep well, do take frequent breaks, do maintain proper nutrition, proper meals. Do not overexert yourself. And most importantly, don't perform tasks for which you do not have the adequate training. While ensuring our physical well-being, we cannot discount the importance of being emotionally fit. This includes taking breaks when we feel overwhelmed, making sure we have a solid support circle, and finding activities that reduce stress and allow us to relax emotionally. The end result should be that we prevent stress and other negative emotions from building up and affecting our ability to serve. So do take breaks when you feel overwhelmed. Do develop a support circle. Do take time for yourself. Do find ways to reduce stress. Do not bottle your feelings. And do not ignore your mental health. Let's talk a little bit more about activities to reduce stress. Some people choose therapy dogs or music as stress reduction activities, as you can see in these pictures. What works for you as a stress relief? Pause the video and think about it for a few seconds.